Hi everybody, this is the Baseball Fight, the amazing, spectacular, terrific, the great one, the People's Champion. Your host, of course, welcome back to the Baseball Hut 2. Hope you like this video and subscribe as we go along, making fun of the personalities of WFAN. I always used to like it when Imus would talk about different personalities on the air, and they would prank them, and they would like goof on them and just say just funny stuff. It gives you a sort of an idea of the kind of individuals that talk about radio, talk about sports talk for 24 hours a day. And it hasn't really changed much, except that the quality of the hosts are not nearly what they were. You're not really seeing the everyman type of person talking sports on the fan. Now you get all these athletes on WFAN like Tiki Barber, who knows nothing about baseball, and you got Boomer Esiason of the Norman and Greg show. I was thinking that would have made like a great it sounds like a great title for like a gay comedy. Norman and Greg. It's like, remember Norman and Greg, that bad comedy back in the 90s? Could have been like a sequel, like a spin-off. Norman and Greg. Dharma leaves Greg and Greg finds Norman. Oh, that's a different story. Norman and Greg on NBC, Tuesday nights at 8:30. But yeah, the personalities at the fan have a narrative which they get from their corporation, CBS, that the Mets are terrible. Not only terrible, but they don't do anything right. And even when they do things right, they do it wrong. And now you have different individuals at this radio station that bounce back and forth, and you can't figure out where they're coming from. And one of the main culprits is the Spaz, Sal Licata. Now, Spaz is a Met fan, but he kind of is very inconsistent. He's been very inconsistent in the first month of this new show that he has with Brandon Tierney. Another guy that's, not nearly. He's a little too self-important for my view. He's a little more important than he thinks he's more important than he actually is. But during the first few weeks of this show, this new show that Sal's been able to get, he's put a paper bag on his head. He has called and said that Pete Alonso was a cancer in the Met clubhouse, even though significant amounts of people have said that he wasn't. David Cohn. Now, who would know better than David Cohn if Pete Alonso was a cancer in the Met clubhouse? He would have heard it from Keith. He would have heard it from Ron Darling. And now, this past week, and then, of course, he said when he had the paper bag over his head, he was embarrassed to be a Met fan. But now this week, after last week calling for the Mets to trade Pete Alonso, I would mention, I saw a little report on Paul Goldschmidt and the trade between the Cardinals and the Diamondbacks. The last player that was traded from the Cardinals to the Diamondbacks was recently DFA'd or released or whatever you want to call it. So the players that got moved for a future Hall of Famer and Paul Goldschmidt, who plays first, has been DFA'd. So those players, those prospects, turned out to be nothing. Now, if you were to trade Pete Alonso, you're not going to get anything for him. And if you trade Pete Alonso before his free agency, you basically punt the next 2 years, 24 and 25. So it's like, well, hey, Spaz, what are you talking about by getting rid of Pete? If anything, we've heard that Pete is great in the clubhouse. Well, this week, he said, this is the Spaz, he said that the Mets were going to contend. He's confident the Mets will contend, that they're going to win. I mean, this guy, he changes his moods very quickly. And the thing with the paper bag is a ridiculous thing. It's very difficult to see someone who's a fan wear a paper bag when the team won 101 games the year before. And this year, obviously, didn't work out, and kind of find out that a lot of bad I mean, a lot of bad karma with this team. This team lost its best player, Edwin Diaz, to an injury to the World Baseball Classic. And they just didn't gel. It just didn't work out. So, but they won 101 games. So you put a paper bag on your head because they played poorly the following year. So stupid. It's a real cry for attention. You got the big job or the next big job, and this is how you act the first few weeks. Oh, it's great. He has a radio job. Nobody can see him with a paper bag unless it's simulcasted. Not everybody saw that. And if you go on the Odyssey, article that they have on there, they don't show a picture of him with the bag over his head. Well, anyway, so like I said, this week the Mets are going to contend next year after he said that they should trade Pete, and he's embarrassed to be a Met fan. And now today, on Friday, because he got to finish off big, he says this, Mets are, and I mentioned I am a Met fan, so this ridiculousness, it's like, what's wrong with this guy? Be consistent. He's a fan. He runs with his emotions. No, he's just spaz. From Odyssey.com, Sal, Mets are about to take over as baseball kings of New York. First of all, I think the Mets have already taken over the town. I think it's going to be a long time before the Yankees get themselves righted. The owner doesn't seem to get that there up in the Bronx. I think the general manager does, but the owner doesn't. So that's a big problem. Anyway, as the Yankees face an identity crisis, enter a homestand 1 game below 500, Spaz believes a dark period is coming in the Bronx. I would mention that his partner, Brandon Tierney, he thinks baseball's going to be bad here for the next few years. Another guy doesn't know what he's talking about. That's going to be good next year and beyond. Sal believes a dark period is coming in the Bronx and will lead to the Bombers' crosstown rivals becoming kings of the city for the first time since their last championship. Quote, I think the Mets are about to take over this town, Spaz said. Right now, it doesn't feel like it. Well, Spaz, you wore a paper bag on your head. You said you didn't feel it. I feel it. You don't feel it. And now you're saying you feel it. But if you actually think about it and do your due diligence and use common sense, these are talk radio hosts. They don't use common sense. If they use common sense, they wouldn't be working for a big corporation in CBS. This town is ripe for the picking with the teams down right now. I believe in Steve Cohen and the direction of this organization. This is the time. Quote, Steve Cohen and his Mets will take over this town, starting with next season. That will be the beginning of what we once saw in the 80s. I would mention about the 80s. People have been writing to me, really denigrating the 86 team, saying it was a fluke. The 86 team, those teams in the 80s won 90 games, 6 out of 7 years. 5 straight years, from 84 to 88. And won 100 games 2 out of 3 years. That's no fluke. The fluke is they only won 1, they didn't win more. The Mets don't look like a team poised to take over the biggest market in the sporting world from a team that has dominated the city for decades. But Spaz believes Cohen's pockets will help accelerate the team's rebuild process. And the owner seeing a chance to take control of the city will make sure the Mets are competitive again next year while still building for sustained success. Quote, they have a dangerous combination of rich, smarts, and balls, Sal said. What they did at the deadline took balls. The smarts, the money, and the guys they have. I really believe the Mets are in much better shape than people are giving them credit for. Well, I agree with that part. Because you have an owner that is not going to be tied down to any one player. Or especially an older player with a year or two left on his contract. But Spaz is all over the place. First, he's got a paper bag on his head. Then he says trade Pete Alonso. He, without any evidence, said he was a cancer in the clubhouse. That he was a problem in the clubhouse. He doesn't say, I may have jumped the gun. Nothing. He hasn't said a damn thing. After he said that, now he's just moved on to the next thing. Oh, it's going to contend next year. Mets are going to be the kings of New York. You have to win first. Okay, this team is not. As a group, needs work. we're going to see what they do in this offseason. We're going to see a lot of players in here you wouldn't expect. I think you're going to see a lot of Japanese imports coming in here over the next year or two. They're going to be more of a world team than say just players from the Western Hemisphere. But be that as it may, this is just another example of putting in a guy who's way over his head. Don't say anything bad like that about Pete Alonso without any kind of evidence that he's a bad guy. That's the worst thing to do. Say someone's a bad guy and they're not a bad guy. Now, I mentioned about this idea about trading Pete Alonso. I saw a stat. Only 2 other players have hit more home runs in their career over the first 5 years. Ralph Kiner and Albert Pujols. Keep in mind that Pete Alonso missed 100 games due to the lockout in 2020. So just keep that in mind. So somebody like Spaz should understand moving Pete Alonso is not a good idea. Not a good idea, Spaz. Now, of course, please subscribe to the Baseball Hut too. I want to thank someone who sent me a super thanks on Thursday. I really appreciate that. The channel is getting close to being monetized. Waiting for the hours to add up. Getting awfully close. And I thank Joseph who sent that out, and I know he's been watching. So I appreciate the super thanks. If you send me super thanks, I'll put the super thanks in the community so you can see that I really appreciate it. So thank you for watching this video. Of course, please subscribe to the Baseball Hut too, and I'll see you later.